Hello. I'm not going to give you a trigger warning, but I will give you a cringer warning. This footage that I'm sharing with you now is from March 3rd this year, about 80 days prior to the protests at Evergreen. And in this footage, Felix Braffith, the head of the TRIO program at Evergreen, or the Upward Bound program, and also one of the heads of the Equity and Inclusion Council, is teaching a room filled with young minds that the atrocities of the past are alive and well in this institution and in this state, and the proper way to deal with these atrocities that are very present is through revolt and revolution. And if you're having a hard time getting through this, you can skip ahead to about the 9-minute mark, where I present a summary and a critique of what's going on in the body of this video.
I would like for folks to take some time to look at this image. And we're not going to go all the way back to the beginnings. We're going to look and start at modern day. And if you can just take a moment to look at this image and look at the two different realities that these students face at the same place, should put into perspective the direction that we're going to go this afternoon. Some people may say that this is in the 60s, and that's down south or back east, and that we're immune to this type of mindset and rhetoric in the Pacific Northwest. And I would encourage you to ask yourself a very critical question: how true is that? And that the people, and particularly the image of this little girl, are people that are still alive today. So for folks that are younger, don't think this is some distant memory of far, far long ago, okay? And so the conditions of our society were to the point where people were literally getting snatched off the street by dogs because they're in a place where they shouldn't be, even if all they're trying to do is to go to the store for their mother. In 2017, certain populations and communities live in the same type of fear. Despite the strides that conversations like this produced, these are images that many of us have seen in the past, particularly civil rights leaders such as MLK. But what's missing from this picture are the more militant and radical mindset of Malcolm X. Those perspectives were just as important in these conversations as the people that we believe made the biggest difference. So when I think back on our history, and I just think back on the images that I've shared with folks, it doesn't necessarily make me feel all good. Because there's no way that the sentiment that people felt 55 years ago, where they didn't even want somebody in the classroom sitting next to them, or they didn't want their son or daughter to be friends with somebody because they're either black or brown, like those sentiments have not gone away. And when I think of most of our faculty and administrators, not just here, right, but around the country, have been exposed to this type of mindset and thinking majority of their lives, unless they have intentionally challenged it and worked hard to continue to fight for what's right, in terms of not treating people wrong because they're black. Okay, it's as simple as that. And there's been many efforts throughout history across the world for revolts. But in 1848, on the island of St. Croix, through education, through organization, and tired of waiting for change to happen, they forcefully took the island back. And they were led by the queens of the island. We all share similar struggles, where people before us have done things that will scare the living daylights out of us right now.
In 7th grade, I was in Ms. Pearson's leadership class, sitting by my friend. The door swings wide open, and out comes 2 cops, the principal, and the 2 cops look straight at me, and then 6 other Asian boys in the classroom. They pointed at us like 1, 2, 3, 4, get up. And, I'm walking out, and right out the side of the classroom, the cops told us to put ourselves on the wall, hands face up, turn your back. It was a hard moment. We were patted down. And at that moment, I kind of remembered a story that my grandfather told me. I am the son and grandson of refugee survivors of the Khmer Rouge genocide. So what that was, this radical group in 1975 came to Cambodia and took over the government, and basically they wanted to change everything. They wanted to erase the previous history of that country. They burned on the libraries. They killed a lot of people who were cultural centers, people who wore glasses, people who were educators. 10 million people later, dead. My grandfather told me was that night, the soldier busted through his house and basically said, "You gotta leave, we're gonna burn down your house right now." My grandfather grabbed my mother, went out to the house and stood on the street, and then the soldiers lined them up. And basically, they started asking questions, who did what, and someone said, "I'm a doctor," boom, got shot. This person wore glasses, they just shot him right there. And I kind of tell you this story because at that moment, when I was getting patted down and all my friends and I didn't know what we were doing, I kind of thought about that. Like, is that kind of what it feels like to be singled out, to be judged, to be labeled? Thank you.
For me, my whole body is shaking right now because I can relate to a lot of what you say, and it brings fear into my heart for my own children. When I'm listening to that story, I see that racism, it repeats itself. Like it has this history to keep going and to keep living on. And despite everything, despite all of it, you're still here. Despite everything that we've been through, we're still here. I know that I wouldn't be who I am today without the stories that I was able to hear from my grandparents and my grandmother. In 1941, our island was bombed. Our island was abandoned by the United States. While my grandmother was only 7 years old, she walked along the way trying to go to her uncle's house. When she heard sirens, and she heard explosions, and she heard bombs, and she ran for her life. It makes me think of what our grandparents went through, what they endured and what they witnessed. Enslavement, torture, rapes, beheadings. They didn't ask for any of it. They didn't ask for the wars. This wasn't their war, right? But they fought, they survived, they tricked, they resisted, and they protected each other. Just as racism lives on, so too does your family history of survival and resilience. It continues. History can't hold you down when you use it to move you forward.
Just like that first image that I put up there with one of the Little Rock Nine being screamed at by another student who were both going to the same school is proof, even today, that despite being in the same institution, the experiences are much different. And which means that you have to keep your end of the bargain up at looking at the struggle that they went through to help you navigate the complicated, nuanced, passive-aggressive ways to stifle and silence people in the educational system.
What is Felix doing? It's pretty much just there. He's not that clever of a person. No offense. But he's taking a present struggle, a present situation, and superimposing that present struggle over a struggle of the past. And the juicier and the more traumatic the past struggle, the better. So he's gone through and selectively chosen or told these people to tell their traumatic ancestral stories, right? He started with his own by talking about the Caribbean island where his ancestors came from, and that there was a big revolt. And what happens 8 weeks later? at Evergreen, this little island of a college in the woods, there's this big revolt. And then he has a student, or a graduated student, to talk about being lined up by the police based on his race, so he's in a racial lineup, right, and patted down, and how that reminded him of the massacre in Cambodia, right, where 10 million people were slaughtered, the genocide. So genocide is put on the same grounding as a racial profile incident with police. And then furthermore, there's the advisor, somebody who's in a position of authority, responds to that, says she's shaking, and says that she's remembering how her own ancestral trauma of the United States absolutely abandoning her island. And I think she's talking about Guam, because she talks about December of 1941. So what happened in Guam in December of 1941? Well, there was this thing that happened in Hawaii in December of 1941, where the Japanese came around and kind of pooped a little bit of bombs all over everything. And they did that in Hawaii, and they did that in Guam. So I think that the Americans, they tried to do their best to fisticuffs with the Japanese, but they lost that round. They had to go. And then what happened to that island under Japanese rule? Not a lot of good things happened. But what does that have to do with trying to graduate college? What does any of this have to do with trying to graduate college? So Felix kind of brings it right back around, and he says, audaciously, completely openly, that the racism that occurred 60, 50 years ago is alive and well in this very institution. He basically says that. And if that's what he's teaching people, how responsible should he be that 8 weeks later, the students revolt and they overthrow this horrendous racially motivated system that's all out to suppress and oppress them? Is it any wonder that kids are going to act like they're being taught they should act? And should they act that way? Do these grand, horrific narratives that actually, this is a particular case, but if you go into anthropology courses or sociology courses in a lot of colleges right now, they're going to hyphenate this colonial mindset. They're gonna go over and over and over all these atrocities that the Western civilization committed over and over and over and over and over again, to such a degree that you'll completely forget that you're sitting in a well-lit room that's temperature controlled with your little smartphone in your pocket. Well, I'm talking to mine right now, right? And all of your different things that, like I said, all your medicine, all this stuff is going to be completely forgot. And what we're going to see when we see the power structures is just oppression, is pure colonialism. And it's hogwash. It's absolute poison, because kids do not have it that bad. Kids are not starving. So these revolts that happened in the past came because there was a huge disparity. Not to say that the disparity doesn't exist, but the disparity that you describe in your personal narrative has to be commiserate with the disparity in your reality, or else you're going to overreact. And so this is a charge to, if there is at all any very far left-leaning sociologists or anthropologists like that even care to listen to me, why don't you guys think about maybe not blowing things out of proportion and try to teach people some grounding in the actual present that they're in, which isn't that bad. Not to say that it can't be better, but to paint it as this huge war of the zombies, or war of the horses, to plug my rock opera, is to completely give the kids this inability to actually act in a way that's going to change the world. Well, not even change the world, but engage the world as it is. You're painting a false narrative. You're painting this nightmare where there's only kind of not that bad of a nightmare, because yes, things are a lot better than they were 60 years ago. And if you don't believe me, tell me that in the comments, and I'll try to get some facts to help support my case.